Letting go is often misunderstood as a passive act, something vague or mystical that we're told to do without a clear explanation of how or why it works. But in reality, letting go is a biological process grounded in neuroscience. It's not merely a mindset, it's a shift in how your nervous system, particularly your brain, processes information and manages control. When we examine what's really happening when someone lets go, we see clear patterns of neural activity that support this transformation. Specifically, we can look at how different areas of the brain either engage or disengage during moments of surrender or release. The prefrontal cortex is one of the brain's most powerful tools for conscious control. It's involved in decision, making planning, and predicting outcomes. This area helps us stay organized and directed toward our goals. But when it becomes overactive, especially under stress, it can create patterns of rumination, hypervigilance, and obsessive thinking. In this state, the mind is trying to control every variable, every outcome. The nervous system is in a state of high sympathetic arousal, meaning it's preparing for threat, challenge, or conflict. This state is useful in short bursts, like when you're avoiding danger or needing to solve an immediate problem. However, when this becomes your default state, it can be mentally and physically exhausting. You start to perceive everything, even neutral events, as things you need to manage or fix. Letting go begins when you allow a shift from that high control, high alert state into a more regulated and spacious one. This involves deactivating certain parts of the prefrontal cortex and allowing other brain regions, such as the insula and posterior cingulate cortex, to engage. These areas are associated with internal awareness, self-regulation, and reflection. Letting go means allowing your brain to widen its perspective. You're moving out of the tunnel vision that stress creates and into a broader, more integrated view of your experience. The process is supported by the autonomic nervous system, specifically the parasympathetic branch, which promotes rest, digestion, and recovery. When the parasympathetic system activates, your heart rate slows, your breathing deepens, and your body stops scanning for danger. From a neurochemical perspective, this transition also involves a reduction in cortisol and adrenaline and a rise in serotonin and oxytocin, compounds that promote calm, bonding, and openness. So when people talk about letting go, what they're really describing is a biological shift that involves decreased neural activity in control-centric areas of the brain and increased activity in systems designed for presence, trust, and reflection. This isn't about passivity. It's about strategically shifting your internal state to optimize how your brain and body function. There are tools we can use to support this process. For example, slow, controlled exhalation is a powerful way to engage the parasympathetic system. When you extend your exhale longer than your inhale, say 4 seconds in and 8 seconds out, you send a signal to your brainstem that you are safe. This signal is relayed to the hypothalamus and amygdala, two regions involved in threat detection and emotional regulation. As these areas calm down, the frontal cortex also begins to let go of its high alert grip. Another tool is what we call panoramic vision. When we are stressed, our visual field narrows. Literally, we tend to focus on a single point, mimicking the tunnel vision of fight or flight mode. By deliberately relaxing your gaze and widening your visual field, you create a neurobiological loop that informs your brain that you're not in immediate danger. This lowers physiological arousal and helps facilitate that letting go process. Letting go also requires a psychological reframe. Often we resist letting go because we equate it with losing control or failing. But in reality, holding on too tightly often leads to poorer performance, reduced creativity, and burnout. When you trust that your nervous system can regulate itself and that not every variable must be managed consciously, you open the door to more effective functioning. The prefrontal cortex doesn't disappear from the equation. It simply becomes more balanced, more integrated into a larger system of awareness that includes your body, your senses, and your intuition. This shift is deeply empowering. It means you don't have to carry the full burden of control. You can learn to let go not as a last resort, but as a deliberate act of intelligence, an act that reflects a deep understanding of how the human system works. Letting go becomes a form of mastery, not weakness. In this way, neuroscience validates something ancient traditions have always taught, that surrender is a strength, not a defeat. And in this biological act of letting go, we don't lose power, we reclaim it. Relaxation is not something that just happens when we lie down or stop working. It is a skill, a practice, and most importantly, a trainable process within the human nervous system. From a neuroscientific perspective, relaxation involves more than just the absence of stress. It is an active state of regulation that supports recovery, cognitive clarity, and emotional resilience. The mistake many people make is assuming that relaxation is purely psychological or something that requires changing external conditions, like going on vacation or taking a break. While those things can help, the most powerful forms of relaxation come from directly engaging and training the body's own internal systems, especially the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system has two primary branches: the sympathetic nervous system, which drives alertness, focus, and fight or flight responses, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which governs states of rest, digestion, and recovery. These systems are constantly in flux, balancing each other throughout the day. True relaxation is about shifting the dominance from sympathetic arousal to parasympathetic activation. This isn't something that happens randomly. It's something you can learn to control through behavior, breathing, posture, and even vision. For example, breathing is one of the most immediate and powerful tools we have to influence our internal state. Short, shallow breaths signal to the brain that we are under threat. This increases sympathetic tone, raising heart rate, tightening muscles, and narrowing attention. In contrast, slow, deep breathing, particularly when the exhalation is longer than the inhalation, activates the parasympathetic response. This signals safety and allows the body to lower cortisol levels, reduce heart rate, and soften muscular tension. This is not abstract theory. It's supported by measurable changes in heart rate variability, HRV, which is a marker of your body's ability to regulate stress. The higher your HRV in a relaxed state, the more adaptable and resilient your nervous system is. Another powerful lever for relaxation is visual focus. When we are stressed, our eyes tend to fixate and narrow their focus. This mimics the tunnel vision of a predator or prey in survival mode. By deliberately widening our visual field, what is called panoramic vision, we inform the brain that we are not under immediate threat. The eyes are not just passive sensory organs. They are extensions of the brain. Changing how you use your vision directly changes your internal state. When you relax your gaze and allow peripheral vision to come into awareness, your brain automatically starts shifting from a high, alert sympathetic mode into a calmer parasympathetic state. This is one of the fastest ways to begin the process of relaxation, and it doesn't require any tools or equipment, just awareness and intention. Posture is another factor that influences relaxation. When we are stressed or overwhelmed, we tend to hunch our shoulders, clench our jaws, and restrict movement. This body language reinforces a sense of vigilance and internal contraction. However, when we consciously adopt a more open, upright, and relaxed posture, even if we don't feel calm at first, it sends a feedback signal to the brain that we are not in danger. This process, known as interoception, allows the brain to interpret body signals as emotional cues. By softening your muscles, opening your chest, and breathing fully, you can begin to create a state of internal calm, even if the external world remains unchanged. It's also important to understand that relaxation is not the opposite of productivity. In fact, they are deeply connected. Recovery enhances performance. When the nervous system is in a regulated state, the brain can focus better, solve problems more effectively, and process emotional experiences more thoroughly. This is why periods of deep relaxation, whether through breathwork meditation, non-sleep deep rest, NSDR, or simply mindful stillness, are essential for anyone seeking sustained performance over time. They allow the brain to enter modes that enhance neuroplasticity, consolidate memory, and improve emotional regulation. Relaxation doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing the right things to allow your nervous system to reset. And that often requires deliberate practice. Just like you train your muscles or your intellect, you can train your nervous system to become more efficient at switching into recovery mode. Over time, the more you practice these methods, breath control, panoramic vision, body awareness, the more quickly and deeply you can enter relaxed states even in high-stress environments. This makes relaxation not a luxury, but a biological necessity and a form of strategic intelligence. If your nervous system is constantly on high alert, you're burning through mental and physical resources unnecessarily. You may be awake, but you're not fully present. or capable of nuanced decision making. By learning to guide yourself into relaxed states, you gain access to parts of your brain and body that otherwise remain dormant under stress. Relaxation, then, is not a passive state you fall into. It's a doorway you can learn to open reliably, repeatedly, and intentionally. It is an active biological process, and when you train it like a skill, it becomes one of the most powerful assets you can have for living a focused, resilient, and creative life. Trusting the universe is often framed as a philosophical or spiritual idea, but at its core, it can be understood through biology and neuroscience. What does it mean to trust? And how can we do that in a world filled with uncertainty, unpredictability, and constant change? From a scientific standpoint, trusting the universe starts with trusting your own biology, specifically your nervous system's built-in capacity to adapt, respond, and recover. At birth, we are equipped with an incredibly dynamic system designed to interpret, respond to, and learn from our environment. The human brain, in combination with the autonomic nervous system, constantly processes incoming signals to determine whether we are safe, at risk, or in danger. This determination doesn't just affect how we feel, it shapes our thoughts, behavior, and ability to make decisions. When we trust that our biology can navigate change, we stop needing to micromanage every detail of our environment, and that's the first step toward what many call trusting the universe. When uncertainty arises, the brain immediately engages systems that assess potential threat. The amygdala becomes more active, scanning for danger, while the hypothalamus coordinates the release of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. This is the body preparing itself to take action, what we call the fight or flight response. While this reaction is essential in real danger, it can become chronically activated when we're dealing with psychological or future-based uncertainty, like worrying about our career, relationships, or health. In this state, trust feels nearly impossible. That's because our biology is primed for defense, not openness. But the human nervous system is not fixed in one state. It is flexible, capable of shifting based on inputs we can learn to control. Practices like breathwork, physical movement, mindfulness, and social connection allow the nervous system to deactivate the threat response and enter a state of regulation. In that regulated state, we're not just calmer, we're more receptive, more creative, and more able to see the full context of a situation. That's when trust becomes possible, not because we force ourselves to feel it, but because our body and brain are no longer dominated by fear. Trusting the universe, then, is not a blind leap into nothingness. It is a physiological shift that allows us to tolerate the unknown without becoming overwhelmed. When you're regulated, your brain activates regions such as the prefrontal cortex, which supports reasoning, flexibility, and foresight. You're better able to assess risks, recognize patterns, and navigate complexity. The default mode network, a brain system involved in introspection, meaning-making, and connecting past experiences to future possibilities, also becomes more active. These cognitive tools are only available when your nervous system feels safe. That means trust is not about turning off your brain. It's about gaining access to the best parts of it. We also need to understand that the brain is predictive. It constantly builds models of what's likely to happen next based on past experiences and current cues. When you train your biology to remain calm in uncertainty, the brain gradually updates its predictions. It learns that not knowing what will happen does not equal danger. Over time, this process rewires the brain's baseline response to the unknown, making trust more reflexive, more embodied. You don't just tell yourself to trust, you become someone who does. Another important aspect of trusting the universe is understanding that control is not always the most effective strategy. While we can influence outcomes through effort, focus, and planning, much of life exists outside our control. When we try to manage every variable, we exhaust our cognitive resources and increase anxiety. Paradoxically, releasing that grip, letting go of the illusion of total control, allows our biology to shift into a more optimal state. This state is marked by increased access to intuition, creativity, and adaptability. These aren't mystical concepts. They are supported by the neurobiology of calm awareness and flexible attention. When we feel safe and connected, either to ourselves, to others, or to something larger, we allow the nervous system to operate in coherence. Heart rate, breathing, and neural rhythms begin to synchronize. This coherence creates a sense of inner alignment where our actions, emotions and thoughts are not in conflict, but working together. From this state, we begin to notice opportunities, insights, and solutions that were previously invisible in our stress-narrowed state of mind. Trust in this way becomes a lens that enhances perception. Finally, it's important to recognize that trusting the universe does not mean inaction. It doesn't mean we give up agency or responsibility. It means we learn to work with our biology rather than against it. It means we take action from a grounded, present, and regulated place rather than a reactive, fearful one. The result is not only more peace, but more effectiveness, more alignment with reality, and more capacity to adapt. So trusting the universe begins inside you, not in the world outside. It starts with the understanding that your nervous system is built not just for survival, but for resilience and growth. When you support that system through regulation, awareness, and intentional practice, trust becomes a biological experience, not just a mental idea. And from that place, you're able to navigate life with clarity, openness, and strength. Stress is a biological response designed to help us survive. In acute situations, it sharpens our focus, mobilizes energy, and prepares us to take immediate action. However, when stress becomes chronic, when the body and mind are constantly in a state of hyper-alertness, it narrows our field of awareness. This narrowing is not just metaphorical, it is deeply physiological. Under stress, our visual field literally contracts, our hearing becomes more selective, and our thinking becomes linear and rigid. The brain shifts into survival mode, prioritizing short-term safety over long-term growth or exploration. This is why people under chronic stress often feel stuck, anxious, and incapable of seeing options or imagining better outcomes. In contrast, when we cultivate trust, especially trust in ourselves and in the unfolding of life, our awareness expands. We become more creative, more open, and more capable of perceiving subtle opportunities and patterns that were previously invisible. The neurological basis for this lies in how different brain networks function under varying states of arousal. When stress is high, the sympathetic nervous system dominates, and regions like the amygdala, which governs threat detection and emotional intensity, become overactive. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, which supports flexible thinking, planning, and emotional regulation, loses efficiency. In this state, the brain is not concerned with possibilities or broad thinking. It's concerned with protection. This leads to a kind of tunnel vision where we only see what could go wrong or what needs to be fixed immediately. The longer we stay in this mode, the harder it becomes to think creatively, connect with others, or even regulate our own emotions. It's a cycle that reinforces itself. Stress creates more stress by limiting the very functions that help us move beyond it. On the other hand, trust activates a different set of physiological and neurological responses. Trust is not simply a mental decision, it is a neurobiological shift towards safety. When we feel safe, whether due to a calming environment, supportive relationships, or conscious self-regulation, the parasympathetic nervous system begins to dominate. This shift not only lowers stress hormones like cortisol, but also facilitates the activation of the brain's default mode network. This network is responsible for introspection, creativity, and meaning-making. When it becomes active, we are more likely to have insights, connect ideas in new ways, and view challenges from a broader, more integrated perspective. This is why people often report breakthrough ideas or sudden clarity during times of deep relaxation, such as in the shower, during a walk, or while meditating. These are moments when the brain is not under siege. It has space to wander, reflect, and process information in a nonlinear way. That's not a luxury, it's a built-in feature of the human brain that requires a state of openness and trust to activate. And this is where trusting the process of life, what some call trusting the universe, becomes a neurological advantage. Another layer to consider is attentional control. Stress narrows our attention to what is immediately relevant to our perceived survival. This has evolutionary value, but in modern life, it often becomes maladaptive. For example, if you're anxious about a presentation, your mind may fixate on what could go wrong, how you'll be judged, or what people will think of you. This tunnel of attention reduces your ability to engage with the present moment, connect with your audience, or express yourself authentically. In contrast, when you trust the process, when you allow yourself to be present, you can draw on a wider range of mental and emotional resources. You remember your preparation, access your sense of humor, respond to cues in the room, and adjust in real time. This is what expanded awareness looks like in action. Trust also affects perception on a sensory level. When you're in a state of safety and trust, your sensory systems begin to open. You see more of your environment. You hear more nuance in people's voices. You notice patterns and signals that your brain would have filtered out under stress. This expanded perception gives you more data, more raw material for insight, connection, and adaptation. It makes you not only calmer, but smarter, more intuitive, and more resourceful. Importantly, this shift from stress-induced narrowing to trust-based expansion is something we can train. Through regular practices such as breath regulation, mindfulness, physical movement, and quality sleep, we condition our nervous system to recognize safety more easily. We begin to spend less time in fight or flight and more time in a regulated, receptive state. Over time, the brain learns that it is safe to open, explore, and imagine. This doesn't mean ignoring real challenges or pretending everything is fine. It means creating the internal conditions for your best self to show up. Mentally, emotionally, and behaviorally. In essence, trusting the universe is not about magical thinking or passive waiting. It's about shifting your internal state in a way that restores your full cognitive and emotional capacity. Stress will always be part of life, but how we meet it determines whether we become trapped by it or rise above it. When we choose to regulate, to breathe, to slow down, and to trust, we reclaim the wide field of awareness that stress so often steals from us. In that expanded awareness, we don't just see the world more clearly. We see ourselves more clearly too, and from that clarity comes power, creativity, and real transformation. Letting go is one of the most misunderstood, yet most biologically essential processes for mental and emotional health. From a neuroscience and physiology standpoint, letting go is not passive. It is an active, trainable release of internal tension. When we hold on to things, whether it's a grudge, an expectation, or the need to control outcomes, we are engaging parts of the brain and body designed for vigilance. These systems serve a purpose in keeping us safe, but when constantly activated, they create long-term dysregulation. Letting go, in contrast, shifts our neurobiology out of survival mode and into a state of regulation and neuroplastic readiness, where learning, healing, and adaptation become possible. At the core of this process is the concept of limbic friction, the internal tug of war between what we consciously want and what our subconscious patterns keep repeating. For example, you may consciously want to relax, but your body is still clenched, your breath is shallow, and your mind keeps returning to that one conversation or outcome. This friction activates circuits in the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula, regions responsible for conflict monitoring and internal state awareness. The longer the friction persists without resolution, the more the nervous system becomes dysregulated and the harder it is to shift states. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting or giving up. It means turning down the signal of hypervigilance. From a biological lens, this starts by decreasing sympathetic arousal and increasing parasympathetic tone. One way to do this is through exhale. Emphasize breathing, where the exhalation is longer than the inhalation. This pattern of breathing increases vagal tone, which is the activity of the vagus nerve, a critical component of the parasympathetic nervous system. Higher vagal tone is associated with better emotional regulation, reduced inflammation, and improved heart rate variability, all markers of a nervous system capable of letting go and rebalancing itself. Another important layer of letting go is interoception, our ability to sense the internal state of our body. Many people try to let go, using purely cognitive methods, thinking their way out of overthinking. But the real shift happens when we drop into bodily awareness. When you notice the tightness in your chest, the clenching of your jaw, or the tension in your shoulders, and then consciously relax those areas, you are sending real-time feedback to your brain that the threat has passed. This kind of somatic letting go creates changes in the brain's default mode network, which governs rumination, self-referential thinking, and narrative construction. By relaxing the body, we decrease the dominance of this network and open space for presence and clarity. There's also a temporal component to letting go, how we relate to time. The brain is constantly making predictions based on past experiences and projecting those into the future. When we're unable to let go, we're often caught in unresolved past events or anxious anticipation of what might go wrong. This activates the hippocampus and the medial prefrontal cortex in repetitive loops, keeping us stuck in stories and scenarios. When we intentionally shift our focus to the present moment, using sensory inputs like breath, sound, or vision, we disengage these predictive loops. The present moment is neurologically different from the remembered past or the imagined future. It activates different networks, especially those associated with sensory integration and executive function. In this way, letting go becomes an act of presence, not escape. Letting go also requires a shift in our internal narrative structure. The stories we tell ourselves about who we are, what should happen, and what we must control to feel okay. The brain is a storytelling organ, and it uses narrative coherence as a survival tool. But sometimes those stories are outdated, rooted in old patterns of fear or identity that no longer serve us. By letting go of those rigid narratives, we create space for new neural pathways to form, a process known as neuroplasticity. This allows the brain to update its model of reality to include new possibilities and more flexible ways of being. But this updating can only occur in states of openness, which require us to release the emotional charge tied to the old story. It's also critical to understand that letting go does not require certainty. Many people wait to release tension or expectation until they're sure things will be okay. But from a biological standpoint, this approach is backwards. The nervous system doesn't need certainty, it needs safety. And safety comes not from knowing the future, but from trusting that you can navigate it. When you begin to act from this place, not because you know how it will all unfold, but because you are grounded in a regulated internal state, you experience freedom. The freedom to choose a new response, the freedom to stop rehearsing pain, the freedom to feel peace even when outcomes are unknown. Letting go is not the end of effort or discipline. It's the alignment of your effort with reality. It means focusing your energy on what you can control, your breath, your posture, your attention, and releasing the need to force what you cannot. This balance is the hallmark of a well-regulated nervous system, flexible, adaptive, and efficient. And this, more than anything else, is what prepares the brain and body to move forward, not weighed down by the past, not gripped by fear of the future, but ready for what is here now. The nervous system thrives in states of rhythm and regulation. These rhythms, breath cycles, heartbeats, sleep patterns, even cycles of focus and rest, form the biological foundation for how we process life. But when we move through our days in a constant state of urgency or overstimulation, we disrupt those natural rhythms, leading to dysregulation, anxiety, fatigue, and impaired decision-making. The concept of relaxing into the now is not merely philosophical, it's a return to physiological alignment. By learning to work with the natural pace of the nervous system, we cultivate a state of coherence where body and mind are synchronized, allowing us to experience a deeper sense of presence, clarity, and adaptability. One of the most accessible ways to induce this state is through conscious regulation of breath. The breath is the only autonomic function we can directly control, making it a powerful tool for shifting state. When we inhale, we activate the sympathetic nervous system slightly, energizing the body. When we exhale, we activate the parasympathetic nervous system, calming the body. This balance is critical. When you slow down your breathing, especially by extending the exhale, you signal to the brain that there is no immediate threat. This initiates a cascade of effects. Heart rate slows, blood pressure stabilizes, and stress hormones begin to decline. The brain, receiving this feedback, shifts away from the amygdala-driven mode of threat detection and re-engages the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for executive function and nuanced thinking. This physiological shift opens the doorway to the present moment. Most people are not living in the now. They are mentally pulled between rumination about the past and anticipation of the future. This temporal dislocation is one of the primary drivers of stress, and it's encoded in the structure of the brain itself. The default mode network, active during rest and introspection, becomes overactive in individuals who are constantly thinking about what went wrong or what might go wrong. To relax into the now is to step out of this loop. It means turning attention from abstract thought to embodied experience, what you're seeing, hearing, feeling, and breathing in this very moment. From a neurochemical perspective, this state of presence correlates with increased levels of neurotransmitters such as serotonin and acetylcholine. These chemicals support calm attention, mood regulation, and sensory engagement. In this state, time seems to slow down, not because the clock changes, but because perception becomes more refined. You notice details you would otherwise overlook. You respond instead of react. You begin to experience your own consciousness, not as a racing narrative, but as a spacious field of awareness. This is the essence of nervous system rhythm, attunement to the flow of now. It's important to understand that this rhythm is not always about stillness. Sometimes relaxing into the now includes movement, walking, dancing, exercising, or engaging in focused work. What matters is not the activity itself, but the internal state from which it arises. Are you acting from pressure, from compulsion, from fear of what happens if you stop? Or are you moving in alignment with your body's cues, with attention and presence? The nervous system can only self-regulate when it is not being chronically hijacked by urgency. That's why moments of intentional stillness, pausing, breathing, grounding are so essential. They act as reset points for the entire system. This rhythm is also supported by consistency. The brain and body do not thrive in chaos. They thrive in patterns. When you sleep at the same time, eat at regular intervals, engage in routine practices like journaling or meditation, you train the nervous system to anticipate calm. Anticipation is a powerful tool. Just as the brain can anticipate threat, it can also anticipate safety. This predictive capacity of the brain is one of the keys to lasting change. When the body expects peace, it no longer overreacts to every signal. You become less reactive, more adaptable, and more able to flow with what arises. In the context of trusting the universe, this rhythm gives us something tangible to hold on to. You may not control outcomes, but you can control your rhythm. You can return to the breath. You can return to your body. You can anchor yourself in presence. From this anchored place, uncertainty loses its power to destabilize. Instead of bracing against life, you begin to participate in it. You ride the waves, not by forcing them to stop, but by learning to balance your own nervous system so you can stay afloat. This is not a passive state. It is a deeply engaged, embodied awareness that comes from inner coherence. What many people call intuition, clarity, or spiritual insight often emerges from this rhythm. When the nervous system is regulated, when the mind is quiet and the body is at ease, a different kind of intelligence surfaces, one that integrates logic, emotion, and sensation. This intelligence doesn't rush. It doesn't panic. It listens. And it guides us not toward control, but toward alignment. That alignment is the quiet strength at the heart of relaxing into the now. Ultimately, the rhythm of the nervous system is the rhythm of your life. When you respect it, you become more stable, more clear, and more able to engage with complexity. When you ignore it, you become fragmented, exhausted, and reactive. So the invitation is simple, though not always easy. Slow down, breathe deeper, and let your biology remind you that the present moment is not just where life happens. It's where you access your deepest resilience, your sharpest clarity, and your greatest peace.